Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Anna. It's great to be here. I want to begin real quick. How about another round of applause for Nick Jackson? What about an incredible life of service? Julie and I had the opportunity to be in the Otna region just about a month and a half ago, and we were honored to spend some time with Nick and other elders there and the great leadership in that region. And when you look at his life, I think Citizen of the Year for AFN, his service to our state, to our country as a veteran has been amazing. So one more round of applause for Nick. Well, it's an honor for me to be here today. AFN is certainly one of the highlights of the year for me and for my wife, Julie, who is also here in the audience. I always look to her for my strength. She's having a great time with her cousins, buying Christmas gifts for our family and friends. By the way, we're always amazed by the incredible crafts and artwork on display throughout the convention hall. And to our skilled artisans, I want you to know I've just introduced two pieces of legislation that we work with many of you on to protect the rights, your rights as Alaska Native artists and the next generation to continue the centuries-old practice of using natural materials like walrus ivory and bird feathers in your artwork. That should be a no-brainer, and we're going to try and get a law passed to make sure that happens. I want to begin by thanking AFN's leadership, Anna, Joe, and a big congratulations to Ben Malott. We are excited about Ben's strong leadership, his great experience with AFN, and Ben, we are 100% behind you. I think you're going to do an amazing job here. And of course, I know Julie Kitka has gotten a lot of accolades, and she deserves every single one of them. On the Senate floor back in D.C., I regularly give a speech about a special Alaskan. We call that Alaskan our Alaskan of the Week. I try to give this every week. By the way, it's got a lot of folks from our Alaska Native community who have been our Alaskan of the Week. So recently, I gave a speech about Julie as our Alaskan of the Week, about her great service. In that speech, I usually love to brag about that person, that Alaskan, in my speech. But Julie Kitka, always humble, stressed that the great successes of AFN throughout her tenure were accomplished because of partnerships with all of you. She actually said, when we were writing this speech, nothing I did was ever done alone. Partnership is such a great leadership role model. So Julie Kitka, one more time, thank you for your great leadership, which you've done such a great job at. Well, as I always do with my wife, Julie, I spent the summer traveling through many rural Alaska communities, including St. Paul, Kotzebue. We were up on the Yukon. We were in the Otna region, Nuiqsut, Utqiagvik. As always, we learned so much in our roundtable discussions, especially from our elders. We saw beautiful dancing. Tried to dance a little bit myself. That's always embarrassing. Ate delicious food, met new friends, and reconnected with old ones. So again, to everybody that we were with, and it was with a lot of folks this summer, thank you for the warm, wonderful hospitality that we experienced literally everywhere we went. It is such a blessing of our Native community. And as part of these travels, we are honored to attend a Nlakatuk in Utqiagvik. It's magic when the whole community comes out to celebrate a cultural practice, subsistence whaling in this case, that Inupiat whalers have sustainably conducted for thousands of years. And this year, like 6 years ago, these same whaling captains, through very hard work, were able to successfully renew their quota at the International Whaling Commission meeting in Peru. That is a big deal and deserves a round of applause, a really big deal. This has been a top priority of mine as your senator. As we know, success is never guaranteed at these International Whaling Commission meetings. The IWC has not always been a friend of our Alaska whaling captains. So before the big IWC meeting that was in Brazil in 2018 and in Peru this year, we all came together and put together a strategy. With our whaling captains, we met with the U.S. State Department and NOAA to ensure the United States as a country had a coordinated strategy to make sure our Alaska Native whaling captains were able to get their IWC quota. Now, as part of this strategy, both in 2018 and this past year in 2024, I hosted a reception in the U.S. Capitol. There's some photos from that. The goal of this reception was to invite the ambassadors, particularly from the countries that have not been friends of Alaska Native whaling, because we need their votes at this international convention. So, if you see here at this convention, at one point, both in 2018 and in 2024, I looked across the reception area, and literally every whaling captain had a Latin American ambassador with his arm around him. This is great lobbying on behalf of the IWC, and it worked. It worked because in Peru, just last month, our Alaska Whaling Eskimo Commission leaders were able to secure the first automatic quota renewal in IWC history. That is a giant triumph for Alaska Natives. So I want to do, in that regard, I want to do a big shout out to so many AEWC Chair John Hobson Jr. and the dynamic father-son duo of Crawford Puckatuk, who's the Vice Chair of the AEWC, and Josiah Puckatuk, his son, the Mayor of the North Slope Borough, and so many others. They all made it happen, and the children of the North Slope will look back at what the AEWC did, the Alaska Eskimo Whaling Commission, has achieved in the last 6 years, and they will be grateful for decades to come. So these whaling quotas are the kind of successes we can achieve when we unite behind a common mission. It's more challenging, but this is also the approach that I'm taking with so many of you to address our salmon crisis. As you all know, we've had another banner year in our state in terms of the strength of certain salmon runs, like the Bristol Bay Sockeye Run. But in the Yukon, in Kuskokwim, and other rivers throughout our state, the runs of salmon have once again crashed. Representative Peltola talked very passionately about this yesterday, and our congressional delegation has always worked together to focus on these very important issues. I've mentioned this to all of you before, but I'll do it again. For over three decades ago, I was introduced to what salmon means to Native culture and people through my amazing wife, Julie, and her family's fish camp near Hess Creek on the Yukon River. As a family, we have so many amazing memories and experiences at Julie's family's fish camp, particularly with our 3 daughters, and I know so many people have the same memories, learning how to head and gut and strip and smoke salmon on the banks of the Yukon, learning about their culture, about sharing, about family, about working together, about their heritage. When the kings are running on the Yukon, it's the most spiritual place in the world. When the fish aren't running, and when the smokehouses are empty, it feels like something is very wrong with the universe. That's why my wife and my daughters, again, experienced on the Yukon this summer that feeling at Julie's family's fish camp. We were all worried, desperately worried about a whole generation of children that will miss out on this vital experience. It is soul-wrenching. So here's what I'm working on with all of you and, of course, with our congressional delegation. Alaskans can agree on this. We need to identify and address research prioritization gaps with comprehensive data and the best scientific minds, including indigenous knowledge, to figure out what is the cause of these devastating salmon declines. So that's what my bill, the Alaska Salmon Research Task Force Act, does. Now, this bill was passed into law, and here's what it does. It brings the best minds in the world, state, federal, university, indigenous, tribal, to figure out what is happening. And it includes a specific working group on the Kuskokwim and Yukon regions. By the way, probably doesn't surprise you, this bill was my wife Julie's idea, and the task force report was just recently completed. This was required by the law. It's at my booth, and if you want a copy, we would love for you guys to take a look at my booth here at AFN, and I want to thank so many in our Alaska Native community who took part in this task force and the research and the hard work of this report. This is what the task force recommends as we move forward. They call it gravel to gravel, G to G, which is the strategic approach that was coordinated research where individual projects, regardless of whether they are led by state, federal, university, tribal, or NGOs, will share information with all other projects on what is happening to our salmon. With this critically important report now completed, my team and I will be working with all of you to build a comprehensive, well-funded salmon research program at the federal level on the goal that we all share, achieving greater abundance and stability in our salmon stocks all across Alaska. Now, thank you. Now, this won't happen overnight, but you have my commitment that we will continue to work our hearts out on getting our salmon back in our rivers. For our children, our children's children, we have to get to the bottom of this and address it, and I certainly am committed to working with all of you on this. Another thing I know we can unite on in terms of a goal with regard to fisheries, which we're able to achieve recently, is making sure that Russia can no longer flood America's domestic markets with their cheap, unsustainable fish. After a long battle with the Biden administration, I was finally able to get them to ban Russian fish from coming into America. When the Russians tried to circumvent this ban by sending their fish through communist China, we shut down that loophole too. This will help all of our coastal communities, many of which are native communities, and our Alaska fishermen. The Russian oligarchs say that they are at war with Alaska fishermen. Well, we're finally fighting back. This includes banning unsafe and often illegal Russian and Chinese trawlers who are likely contributing to depleting our own salmon runs here at home. And I'm now pressing leaders from around the world, Japan, leaders from Canada, I met with the Prime Minister recently, leaders in Europe, to get them to ban Russian fish from coming into their countries as well. The world should want freedom fish from Alaska, not communist fish from Russia or China. So now I want to turn to AFN's incredibly important theme this year, our children, our future ancestors. And I really want to commend Commissioners Gloria O'Neill and Don Gray and all of those who worked on the Way Forward report of Alice Spotted Bear and Walter Soboleff Commission on Native Children. And the glorious point during that last session, we certainly want to follow up with the work she and Don and others did in that important report. We don't want to let that report go onto a shelf and collect dust. That report was spearheaded by legislation that Senator Murkowski wrote that I co-sponsored. And as Gloria and Don said, We know that the statistics are not great. As a matter of fact, they're horrible. Too many Alaska Native children are experiencing poverty and abuse. Too many are in the juvenile justice system. Too many are experiencing mental health challenges. Now, there have been many reports throughout the decades on the well-being of the Alaska Native people. Gloria mentioned that in her comments just a few minutes ago. 30 years ago, if you look at this report, my mother-in-law, Mary Jane Fate, worked on the 1994 report that was also mandated by federal legislation. And when she testified before Congress on this report, she said, quote, "Today we find ourselves in a crisis situation. The outrageous school dropouts, high unemployment, hopelessness, and other tragic and sad endings, such as high rates of suicide and accidents among our youth." That was 30 years ago. The situation then was dire, and still is if you look at the report that Gloria and Don just authored. But here's the thing. We cannot lose hope. This is our youth, and we must recognize that there has been progress in the last 30 years since that last report, particularly significant improvement in education, in life expectancy, and in rates of poverty. So we must do more, working together. And again, I want to thank Gloria and Don for their leadership. One of the key issues in their report is resiliency, and we need that among all Alaskan kids, among all American kids. And in that regard, mental health is key. As outlined in the Way Forward report, 31% of Alaska Natives told researchers, my mental health is poor most of the time or always. 21% of the youth in the report said they had been bullied on social media or through texts. I know social media can be a great positive for many, particularly those who live in rural Alaska. But as we are building out our historic broadband infrastructure in rural Alaska, we need to understand that there is a very strong correlation between declining mental health and increasing social media for all young Alaskans, for all young Americans. I've been very focused on this issue and can report recent progress back in D.C. A few months ago, the Kids Online Safety and Privacy Act, of which I'm original co-sponsor, passed the Senate with over 91 votes. COSA, as we call it, will give parents significantly more control over what their kids are allowed to see online and limits harmful and addictive content that kids are bombarded with online. And this is a good start, but we have to do much more to protect our youth. We can have the strongest economy in the world, the best quality of life in the world, but none of that means anything if so many of our kids are depressed or considering ending their lives because of what they're consuming online. We have to get started on this important issue. Another issue that I'm focused on that relates to our youth, and boy, oh boy, ladies and gentlemen, this is a huge one, is the deadly fentanyl crisis that's hit our state very hard, especially among our youth. Now, the new numbers for 2023 just recently came out. Take a look at these slides. These numbers are shocking. The #1 cause of overdose deaths in Alaska, particularly among our young people, are fentanyl overdoses, and they are up 45% from just last year. By the way, in other parts of America, these numbers are all dropping dramatically, but in our state, they are continuing to surge. And Alaska Natives account for over 33% of the drug overdose from fentanyl just last year. Our kids need to be educated about this lethal drug. That's why my team and I, working with schools and organizations across the state, have launched what we call the One Pill Can Kill campaign. What is it? It's educating our youth that even a tiny, tiny bit, look at how small that is on a pencil tip, a tiny bit of fentanyl can be lethal. They need to know that the drugs they buy on the streets or from friends, including marijuana, can be laced with fentanyl and can kill you. They need to know that one pill can kill. So I would like very much to partner with AFN and other Native organizations across Alaska on this campaign. You can find more information on my website or at our booth downstairs, but here's the bottom line. If we can save just one young Alaskan's life with this campaign, then it will be worth it. Now, as you all know, raising healthy families with healthy children requires safe, affordable housing. And let's face it, in pretty much every part of Alaska, especially rural Alaska, we don't have that. Last August, I hosted the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development in Alaska. A number of you were there at our roundtable that was focused on the outrageously high costs of housing in rural Alaska. So the Secretary of HUD, she runs a big bureaucracy back in D.C. Unfortunately, we are still waiting for HUD's recommendations on how to reduce the federal red tape that is a part of the problem of high costs of housing in rural Alaska. But here's the deal. We shouldn't have to wait. We can do so much of this ourselves. I've seen incredible innovations in housing during all of my travels throughout rural Alaska. Last summer, Julie and I saw how Native leaders in Huslia and Hughes were building affordable, beautiful housing, just like in this photo, at much more competitive costs. These great leaders in our state weren't waiting for the D.C. bureaucrats to give them permission to build. I'll never forget in 2018 when I was in Holy Cross talking about housing with World War II veteran Luke Diminitev and his son Leonard, a Vietnam veteran. Both are master carpenters. Leonard shared with me some wise words from an elder who had been looking out at the vast expanse of an Alaskan forest. This elder said, "There's a house in those woods. You just have to go get it. You have to build it." And in other words, this community was not waiting for the federal government to act. They got a sawmill and they started building. And that is the kind of can-do spirit we need as Alaskans to address this housing shortage. So I think a number of you know that in my AFN remarks, I like to always talk about, and I certainly don't have to remind all of you, about the Alaska Native veterans' incredible patriotic history of military service to our country. Already this morning, I've seen several Alaska Native veterans, and if you're a veteran or a family member of a veteran, could you please stand or raise your hand to be recognized by this audience? Again, you all know this, but it bears repeating. Generation after generation, Alaska Native people have served our country in the military at higher rates than any other ethnic group in America. That is what I call special patriotism, particularly when they were still facing shameful discrimination back home. But Alaska Vietnam vets really got hit hard. They were serving their country when, let's face it, a lot of Americans were avoiding service. They came home, and because they were Vietnam vets, they were treated disgracefully. This happened to my good friend Bill Thomas, who said one day he was fishing in Haines, the next day he was at boot camp in Fort Lewis, and then sent to the jungles of Vietnam. Nearly 2 years later, after his combat tour, Bill was flown to California, dazed, the smell of jungle still in his skin, fear still in his gut, and on the way to being discharged, he had to drive past a group of protesters yelling despicable things at him. And on top of that, Bill, like so many other Alaska Native Vietnam veterans, missed the deadline to apply for their Native allotment, the one that they were legally entitled to, but missed because they were serving their country in a war overseas. His story was not unique. So working with many of you here, I see Benno Cleveland and others, we were able to pass my Vietnam Veterans Allotment Act in 2019 that righted this injustice. That is now the law. It gave our Alaska Native Vietnam veterans the ability to apply for their Native allotment. Unfortunately, the implementation of this bill has been dismal, despite Secretary Holland's commitment to me on making this a priority of hers. In the past 4 years, the Department of Interior has only certified 38 Alaska Native Vietnam era allotments out of the over 2,000 Alaska Native Vietnam vets who are eligible for this. That is a disgrace, and time is running out. So that's why I've recently introduced a new bill to extend the Alaska Native Vietnam Veterans Allotment Program for 5 more years, and importantly, to expand the lands available, particularly in Southeast, where we have such a high number of Vietnam veterans and where it's been very challenging for our Vietnam veterans to get land close to their home. So, here's the challenge on my bill, and I'm going to need AFN's help on this one. Every radical lower 48 environmental group is going to come out and try and kill my bill. They don't want Alaska Natives to have their own land, and they certainly don't want to honor our Vietnam veterans' heroic service. We need to fight back against them. Our cause is just. Our cause is so very just on this bill, and I'm hoping that AFN and others, I've asked the Alaska Native Brotherhood, the Alaska Native Sisterhood, we can all work together and support my bill and continue to bring justice to our Alaska Native Vietnam veterans. Finally, as it relates to our Vietnam veterans like Bill Thomas and Benno and others, I was recently able to pass a Senate resolution that, by the way, passed in the Senate unanimously, commending our Vietnam veterans for their courage and sacrifice. The resolution urges the President, on behalf of the Congress, to formally acknowledge the widespread mistreatment of our Vietnam veterans when they came back home. It offers a long overdue apology, and it calls for increased education in our schools for our children to learn about and understand and respect the courage and sacrifice of these heroes during the Vietnam War. Now, there's another apology that I want to mention, and this one also relates to our military. I think many of you know I deeply respect our military. Last February, I retired from the Marine Corps after 30 years of service, but that doesn't mean our military is perfect. No organization is perfect. I believe that in instances where our country has fallen short of our ideals and has harmed our own citizens, then an apology can be the right thing to do, and it's an important gesture for reconciliation. The egregious and unwarranted U.S. military assaults on the Alaska Native people of Kake and Angoon in the late 1800s is such a case. When Dr. Rosita Worrell brought these historic wrongs to my attention and mentioned the Tlingit people's decades-long pursuit of recognition and an apology, I told my team in the Senate that we would work tirelessly with the Alaska Native leaders to press this issue at the highest levels of the United States Navy and the Pentagon until these communities received an appropriate apology, and that's what we were able to do. So last month, some of you may have seen it, hopefully some of you were there, the U.S. Navy held a ceremony to present an apology and cake, an official ceremony. And there will be another ceremony in Rangoon in a few days. Julie and I will be looking forward to attending, and I am hopeful that these recognition ceremonies will help provide healing and, importantly, show our youth that our country is so strong that it can admit its mistakes to become even stronger. Finally, let me turn to an issue that I've heard about from so many of you in your communities and where I want to compliment our brave Alaska-based military. We all know it's becoming an increasingly dangerous world. We are in a new era of authoritarian aggression with dictators in Beijing and Moscow and Iran and North Korea on the march and working together. And as Alaskans, we are on the front lines of this new Cold War. We've seen this with dramatically increased Chinese and Russian patrols in the air and on the seas near our shores and our skies. You've seen these photos. Chinese bombers, Russian subs, Russian fighters near our aircraft, very aggressive. Our military here has done a great job of protecting our country, just like Alaska Natives have done over the decades. Throughout history, our Alaska Native people have courageously served and defended our country. Think about it. The Alaska Territorial Guard, the Eskimo Scouts, the Tlingit Code Talkers, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, the super high number of Alaska Natives who serve their country in uniform. I'm absolutely confident that with this strong legacy of patriotism and service and a continued buildup of our own military here in Alaska, which I'm very focused on, we as a country and as a state will once again prevail over these authoritarian dictatorships. So let me end with one final plea, and it's related back to the theme of our youth and the theme of this conference. And it's just a pitch for my office. We have a very robust internship program. Representative Peltola yesterday mentioned one young Alaska Native leader, Sam Hiratsika, who started in my office as an intern, rose in my office, then went to Mary's office, and just 2 days ago was the youth speaker at the AFN Elders and Youth Conference. Sam is doing a great job and is showing the next generation of leaders how to lead. So, here's my pitch. We need more interns, Alaska Native interns. I have information at my booth, and I urge all of you to spread the word. We need our Alaska Native people working on Native issues in all branches of our federal government. It's a great experience for them. They are the future, and we want to encourage that kind of service. So, with that, to the leadership of AFN, to Julie and others, thank you again. My Julie and I are very honored to be here. We always love coming to AFN. Thank you, everybody.